Hi, and welcome to the Elders podcast. This is Zena me from Eldership for Leaders, and I am absolutely nervous, actually. I said to Jan before we got on, oh my God, I feel nervous today. And yeah, I know Jan so well. So maybe I'm excited as well to introduce Jan to you, because Jan was the co-founder in a way of our community of elders, in that it was a meeting in the People's Museum in Manchester over a year ago now, that ignited my energy enough to think, no, let's make this community, let's start this community now. And actually, let's root it in Manchester, because me and Jan found each other in Manchester. And we actually found each other through a mutual friend of ours, Tad Hargrave, who's in Canada. So he actually introduced me back to Jan, another fellow storyteller as well. So the reason I've asked Jan to come here on this podcast today is to actually bring us her wisdom on storytelling. For those who were very fortunate enough to come to the inaugural meeting of the members of the community back in February last year, Jan actually facilitated a storytelling session with us all and used an elder's story to do that. So it was a fabulous day looking at storytelling as part of eldership as well. And it's something that we have not really said that much about, mainly because I don't know as much about it as Jan. So this is why Jan is here with us today. So I'm going to introduce you to Jan before we get started, just to give you some information. And I'm actually just going to read to you about Jan, because she has such a prolific background and a wonderful background in terms of storytelling. So Jan is a storyteller, consultant, mentor and plenary speaker who's been performing worldwide since 1986. Born in Manchester, UK, to Jamaican parents, Jan specialises in folktales and myths from the Caribbean, West Africa, North Africa and Arab regions. Always innovating within the form, she has a well-earned reputation for dynamic and generous storytelling, appearing at most international storytelling festivals. She leads storytelling workshops for schools and universities and has been a contributor to BBC radio programmes. Career highlights include storytelling in residence at the Hay Festival, the Viljandi International Folk Musical Festival in Estonia, and TEDx Warsaw and TEDx Manchester. She's developed relationships with several major organisations, including the National Theatre, where she spent a decade as the storytelling consultant, BBC Philharmonic Orchestra, London Philharmonic Orchestra, the Royal Geographical Society, the Natural History Museum, Barnardo's UNHCR, the UATEFL and the British Council. In 2011, she was the recipient of the biannual Thuringer Marsh and Praise, awarded to scholars or performers who have devoted their lives to the services of storytelling, the first non-German to be awarded the prize. As part of the World Shakespeare Festival in 2012, she was the curator for Shakespeare Stories, a landmark exhibition that explored themes of journey and identity in conjunction with the Royal Shakespeare Company and the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. In 2013, The Old Woman, The Buffalo and the Lion of Manding, created and performed with musicians Kwame and Raymond Sereba, toured to acclaim, winning a British Awards for Storytelling Excellence. In 2021, she launched her own storytelling school, the Aqua Storytelling Project, and the school is devoted to developing a new generation of international storytellers, as well as helping teachers to become great storytellers in the classroom. How fabulous is that? But the bit that's missing here, Jan, is the bit that really I nearly fell off my chair with excitement on, was the fact that you've done some work on storytelling for CBeebies.
Yes. I'm not in there. I'll have to put it. I didn't realise I hadn't put it in. It's weird. How could I have not done that? But yeah, I just did. Just finished a series with the BBC Philharmonic in conjunction with CBeebies. So it was the Philharmonic were commissioned by CBeebies to make a series of programs around storytelling and music. called Musical Storyland, and I was advisor on some of the stories as well as presenting. So I didn't go in originally as a presenter. I went in as an advisor, and then they said, can you kind of become a presenter as well? So
Ah,
I
so
did.
it was like full circle for you though, isn't it? In terms of going back to do kind of TV work as well.
Yeah, because in my very younger days, when I was green and didn't know anything about anything, I did some children's television. I wouldn't say it was a joyful experience, but I did it, and now I'm kind of back doing that, but as my true calling as a storyteller, as opposed to confused young person who thought they wanted to be an actor.
And in terms of, from my point of view, one of the reasons why I asked you to support me in setting up this community originally was, for me, you'd found your eldership niche. In my,
Yeah,
this kind of through my lens, you were someone who'd found their eldership niche. Would you agree with that?
you might have to break that down a little bit, because I think I found my niche as a storyteller 100%. And I would say that other people have found me in my eldership, in my elderhood. And the niche of storytelling seems to have been the perfect tool for those who are now looking to me as someone with vast experience in my field. I guess that makes it an eldership niche. People are coming to me for mentorship. People are coming to me with, they need help on a project they're doing, or they're applying for funding and they know that if they put my name in their funding application, it'll get a look, things like that. So I think I've been niched by others. Tad, our good friend Tad Hargrave, says, you are what your community call you. Rather than choosing your name, your community names you. So I think within the storytelling community, and it's not necessarily people who are inside the story, I don't see myself as part of a storytelling community, to be honest. But people who are kind of circling around storytelling and looking for storytelling that makes sense to them seem to be kind of turning up at my door. So I've been niched by a community of people who want to get closer to what storytelling is in a very meaningful and authentic way.
Yeah, and certainly, from my point of view, I kind of remembered looking at it through the corporate lens, because that's kind of my background, where I came from. And I remember when, the whole kind of storytelling agenda kind of started to take roots, in terms of, and of course, a lot of it was to do with Simon Sinek's work on finding your why and all that kind of stuff in terms of an organization, an organizational development perspective. But I kind of found myself being around people who I thought, I'm not sure I'd call you a storyteller. And that was from my perspective.
Yeah.
Because it felt like, I think, I totally agree with you. I think you get named. And I think that's a really interesting point about niche, as that, you're there trying to kind of go, oh, who's my niche and who's my ideal people? It's like, actually, they find you as long as you are visible in some shape or form, so that if you're like, you're being visible and you're not kind of hiding away.
I think there's something else to add to this as well, because a lot of people, there's no elasticity in what they do. So I know as a storyteller, it's very elastic. There's storyteller performer, there's storyteller teacher, there's storyteller trainer, there's storyteller consultant, there's storyteller mentor, and then there's storyteller for little children, there's storyteller for adults. So there's so many kind of facets for me anyway. Not everybody feels the same way about it. There's so many different facets to what being a storyteller is, and if I'm elastic enough, then there's so many different layers of people who will find me, because it's not just one niche. The niche is storytelling, and then there's all the kind of different offshoots. And because I'm flexible enough myself, and there's an elasticity in my approach to my own work, it means that I can be found by many different people for many different reasons.
Yeah, which is fabulous. And I think, you know, I think when I think about kind of the conversations we've had in terms of you in relationship to your work in organisations, for instance, whether it's charities or schools or, you know, I'm calling those in a way institutions, organisations. For me, you know, and obviously I've met some of those people with you, which was amazing, is that I can see that you're talking to their soul. It's not kind of oh, hello, how powerful is storytelling in order to manipulate people to buy into a story about us. You know, it's like, oh, what story do you want to tell? It's like, hold on a minute. Do you know what I mean? And I suppose it was that lack of integrity, I suppose, that I saw in that field as it was emerging. But I also could feel that part of me that was drawn to it, which is probably the performer in me thinking, oh, there's something really great about being able to perform a story where people go, oh, wow. Yeah. But it's like, yeah, but if it's got no substance and no depth and no soul, then it's like, well, that's entertaining.
Yeah. And
oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it can be another tool in your toolbox, but it depends on, you know, how skilled are you at using that tool?
Yeah.
You know, and the skill isn't about the end result, actually. The skill is about the present moment and your engagement with the human beings before which you stand or with whom you sit. It's like, who are you? And so my argument always with storytellers is when they say I want to be a storyteller, why do you want to be a storyteller? Who are you? Not who are you to be a storyteller, but who are you? What type of being are you? Because that's a huge responsibility to stand up in front of others, open a portal between this world and another world, take people in through that portal with you and bring them back out again, sane, still sane. And if you're not sane, you shouldn't be taking them on that journey. And sane is I'm being very flippant about it, but if you're not whole, or if you're not, integrity is a strong word. Yeah, if you don't have integrity, if you're not whole, if you're not there to serve the story and serve the people who've come to listen to the story, you're in service to everyone. You're in service to the people in the room. You're in service to the story. You're in service to the people in the story. I don't call them characters. They're people. You're in service to every single individual in the story because you have to advocate for everybody without bias. Oh, wow. If possible.
Oh gosh, you just nailed that for me. Absolutely. You know? So it's about kind of thinking of the whole, which is where I know like we connect because of the work I do on the systemic side of things. And you know, and I know that some people really struggle because maybe they believe that they're doing all those things you've just said, but it's only when they step in, isn't it? Do they find those parts of themselves that goes, hold on a minute, you may find your own wounds in the telling of the story as well.
But sometimes you don't even know you don't know you're with your wound. Yes. I told a story for 8 years before someone pointed out to me that I was telling my own wound. Yeah. And I was like, oh yeah. Because I wasn't looking at it as a thing. I was so immersed in it, in the telling of it, that I wasn't, and I don't tend to analyze the stories that I tell. I have a very visceral relationship with them when I read them or when I've heard them, and my whole body goes, I have to tell, you have to be told, and then I tell. And it takes a long time for me to understand what it is about the story that's resonating with something in my own life. But I let that come naturally. I don't want to analyze it. I don't want to unpick it. I don't want to unpack it. I just want to immerse myself in it and bring everyone with me on that immersive journey of the story. And then at the end of it, we come out and we go, flipping it, that was a ride, that, wasn't it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then we find out, or I find out, or they find out, you know, once the story's in them, it's like, imagine it's like you shatter a glass and all the shards go everywhere. Like the story's like one of the shards that enters your bloodstream and it stays with you and you don't realize it's with you until something brings it to the surface.
So it's like, in a way, I suppose it's like it's growing inside you. It's kind of, it's almost like a seed that's been planted, and it's slowly finding its way. And it might, don't know how long that might take.
No. And that's my approach. Yeah, my approach is very organic in that way.
Yeah.
So I really am not a fan of prescriptive approaches to story and storytelling. I like everything to be real, in the moment, organic, and like, let it bloom as it blooms, But also I have to be very conscious about knowing which stories could trigger things in the audience. And it's going to sound weird. Trigger them so that they don't respect what I'm doing, rather than trigger their emotional responses. So if I'm telling a story in the Jamaican language, or what people call the vernacular, or what people call the patois or the Creole, Jamaicans call the language. So if I'm telling a story in the Jamaican language, but in people's minds, the Jamaican language is associated with comedy and a comic relief, then I've got to be careful about whom I'm going to be telling that story for, because I don't want anyone in the room to be triggered into those 1970s responses to what I'm doing with true heart.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, so I have to be careful about, audiences and which stories I can bring to certain audiences, because I want there to be so much respect between us.
Yeah.
I have to mind, sometimes I have to filter out the stories that I think I'll get annoyed by the responses to it, or the audience might not have a fully rooted sense of respect for that culture.
Yeah. Wow, that's made me really think about that. That's fascinating. Yeah, just blown me away in terms of me thinking about what you've just said there. I know I'm thinking about times when I've told kind of not kind of mythological stories, but just stories, things that have happened for me, or when particularly if I've been doing an event and I've been standing on a stage, and how I've not necessarily thought about who I'm speaking to. Do you know what I mean? As in, like, I'm thinking particularly now about when I did an event back in 2008. It would have been with corporate bank people, and it was predominantly white men, and being somehow caught in something with them. And then, so because I was talking about eldership in my own way then, which was much more about kind of wisdom, and the journey to wisdom. Ironically, 2008, before the banking crash. I mean, couldn't write it, could you? And there was one or two people who came up to me afterwards and went, that really resonated with me. And then there was other people that came up to me and went, now last year we had Natasha Kaplinski, and she's a good looking woman and we really enjoyed her. I was like, completely missed it. So it was just fascinating to see but I could feel my own rage. So I'm not sure how grounded I was in the telling of it, in the truth as well. So that's really...
Well, you don't know until you're there with them, do you? I mean,
no.
And that's the other thing about keeping it organic and keeping it elastic and keeping it flexible. And luckily for me, because I'm a storyteller, I've got a kind of a repertoire of tales that I can dip into, and that I can quickly be responsive to who's in front of me, and I can swap things out and swap things in. So I think it's easier. I don't know if easier is the word, but it's simpler for me to approach things in that way. So if it's funny, I did a thing with Adrian Childs, the broadcaster, the sports broadcaster Adrian Childs, a while back. He was doing a program before he defected and then refected, is that a word? Before he defected to the ITV and then went back to the BBC. He did this program on BBC, where on the radio, where he would go to a specialist of some kind and they would teach him a little bit about what they've done, and then he would try it. And storytelling was one of the things. And I remember he had to come to my flat when I was living down in London. He came to my flat to visit me, and he approached. It was so funny because he's a sports journalist, and so is my brother. So I'm so used to that world and the whole kind of all the analogies he was using. And he said to me when he got to the front door, he said, as he approached the front door, he said, "I'm now going to speak to the Maradona of storytelling." And then when he came in, he was talking to me about storytelling, and I was talking to him about this kind of very organic approach to my work. And he said, "Yeah, but what kind of audiences?" And I said, "Yeah, everyone. I'm not afraid of any audience." And he was like, "So if you're in a room full of really hard-nosed consultants, business consultants, from the corporate community, how would you feel? Would you back yourself?" I said, "I back myself all day long with any audience, because at the end of the day, I'm just a person in front of a group of other people. It doesn't matter what they think they are. Doesn't matter who they think they are. I'm seeing a group of people. I'm just one of the people in the room of a group of people. And I'm not there to be affected by their idea of status, because, to use your terms, I'm not there to speak to anything but their soul or who they are. I mean, the soul, I'm very loose on that word, but I'm there for that. So I have had instances in the corporate sector, in the corporate community, where people have tried to bring their kind of status ideas to me, but I'm very good at respectfully pushing back, because, again, because of the audience, and because I know most of the time things probably have changed, especially since the focus on EDI that is happening more and more. I know a lot of the time that that group of white men isn't used to having a trainer in front of them or a consultant in front of them who's a black woman with dreadlocks. And I know that a lot of the time they're not used to having to think respectfully or to be respectful, fully respectful, not just surface respectful, but deeply respectful of that black woman when she's standing in front of them. The thing about stories is that it opens something, and you can start off wanting to be that thing that your status says you are. But by the end of the session, you're with everybody in the room, because what's been opened has been opened in everybody, not just, it's not a privilege to you because of your status, because of your title. Everyone gets opened. I'm opened, they're opened.
Yeah, because you're channeling something, and I know what you're saying about the soul. And I suppose for me, I see it much more. It's almost like you're doing something that's bigger than anybody. To me, as it's bigger than us. It's bigger than everything.
Or maybe another way to say it is something bigger than us and everything is asking something of me.
Yes. Yeah. It's kind of being channeled through you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's the thing is that people don't, it's channeled through everyone, actually.
Yes.
And everyone is channeling that big thing through their own niche, through their own gift, through their own skill. I think one of the things that is difficult about storytelling as a tool, as an art form, put whatever your word in, whatever word you want in, what's happening is that people are having this deferential relationship with storytelling. People kind of defer, they defer to it, or they're overly reverential about it. But everything can have that aspect to it, that bigger aspect to it. It's not just because it's story, and this is my struggle with storytelling. That's why I say you've got to be so elastic in your approach. I can't just have this attitude of, I'm doing big work with this big thing that is so big, and everyone is touched by it, and we're a bit better people. If your humanity is in the center of what you're doing, that could be said of being a plumber. Your husband, I've met your husband, yeah. Your husband brought tears to my eyes talking about what was it called?
It was some kind of oh,
It was
pipe
a
bender. It was a pipe bender.
It was a pipe, right. That is a man of true heart and integrity. He's a plumber, you know, the dry cleaner, the cab driver, the teacher. It's to do with how you approach, and it's not something that is isolated. It's not something that is just for the arts or for those who are into the healing arts or somatic work or whatever it is that you think makes you a little bit more special than everybody else. It doesn't. It doesn't. It's just that you've found a language for that thing that has to be shared with the world through your niche.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. So before we came on, I said to Jan, oh, I've picked us an oracle card. And she went, oh God, I hate them.
Now you're still going to let me look at it.
So, but and the reason I always do it, just to kind of get a sense of maybe what this underlying, what this is kind of this chat is about. Do you know what I mean? As in, like, I don't do any planning, I don't do any set questions or anything like that. You know that this is just a chat, and you know we're doing this chat not just for me and you, but for kind of the community and anybody else who might be interested in it. And so I've chosen this oracle card, and I'm smiling away inside because actually it's come out the card is rooted.
Oh, interesting.
Rooted. And so this is,
look at it.
Yes, you can. Yeah. So this is from Sharon Blackie's work. Have you heard of Sharon?
I've heard of Sharon Blackie. We've been involved in the same projects, but I've never met her. I've never actually witnessed her doing her thing. It's just that other people have. There's a guy in Canada called Ian McKenzie who did a gathering of stories a few years back, and Sharon was one of the people invited to be part of that, as was I and some other people, stellar people who I thought, what am I doing in the room with them? But I've been in the room with them. So
so hold on, let's see. So there we go.
Wow.
So this is a person, there's a tree with animals and a little badger, little rabbit, I think it is as well. Yeah, rooted. So I'm not going to read you the whole blurb, but I've just the things that really stand out to me, for particularly as well in the conversation we're having, and also the conversations we often have as well together. So this is what she's saying: the day of the heroic quest, with its all conquering dragon slaying hero saving the world one sword stroke at a time, is over. So the day of the heroic quest, with its all-conquering, dragon-slaying hero saving the world one sword stroke at a time, is over. The notion of the hero's journey is derived from the intensely individualistic, human-centric Western culture mythology that for centuries has had us firmly in its grip. So I know she's referring to Joseph Campbell's work. And that speaks to me because that's what I was trained in at Cranfield Business School. And it always kind of sat a little bit away from me. Anyway, that's another story. But it says, but the journey that we now need to go on is a post-heroic journey, a path to understanding how deeply enmeshed we are in the web of life on this planet. This journey leads us back to a sense of our own grounded belonging to this earth, and asks us what we have to offer it. So what do we have to offer the earth? To be rooted then is to become, and this is the bit I think really relates to some of our conversation, is to become native to our places again. To ground ourselves solidly in the land where we live and the stories and traditions of our native and ancestral places. So I'm not going to read any more than that, but that just like, one of the things that really stood out for me is, like, obviously listening to you talk about your stories from your places and your ancestral places and the places that you know. And you always say, you can't tell my stories. You have to tell your own stories. And that really kind of sat with me for quite a while, where I'm thinking, well, I have no idea what my stories are. Apart from the fairy tales I was brought up with, you know, the Grimm fairy tales and so on, I don't really have any stories that are kind of maybe less Disneyfied than the ones that I kind of grew up with. But one of the things that I would say about what Sharon's work, when I've been reading Sharon, it's much more rooted in kind of, because she's from the Northeast, she's from Ireland. Suddenly she's bringing kind of more relevant to me stories, if you like, in terms of things that I can relate to through my ancestral stuff as well. So I just know, I thought that's really, really interesting, because I know that's one of the things that you say as well, about telling stories that you, and that's what you were saying before, that are meaningful to you.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that is very interesting about this idea of being rooted is, if one is a child of the diaspora, which I am, and you're growing up in a country.
What does that mean?
Child of the diaspora. So my parents are part of the African diaspora, because the African diaspora through the forced diaspora through the kidnapping of Africans, putting them on work camps in countries around the world. There's that. And then there's the diaspora of movement, again, from the Caribbean and from Africa into Europe. And you get step by step further and further away from what you are, who you are, or references to who you are, actually. Positive, wholesome references to who you are. So going back to what I said before about being very careful about when I tell stories in the Jamaican language, because of the programming about the Jamaican language and how detrimental it can be, that's to do with the perception of who you are, and that can impact you. So the further and further you get away from who you are and what you are, the more important it is, from my perspective, to try and reground or reroot myself in the folk tales of my ancestry. And and the thing is, about when I talk about ancestry, I've got to be very broad, because I don't actually know, because I'm a child of the diaspora. So if you're a child of the diaspora and you grow up in a country that you actually don't yet have roots in, then this idea of being rooted becomes a conundrum. You have to find a way to be rooted. And you root, well, I rooted myself in, I'm living in the house I grew up in. So I'm rerouting myself in real terms. So I'm in the house I grew up in. The garden is the garden I played in. So this idea of being rooted is making more sense, but from a familial perspective only, because my parents bought this house in 1965. I live here. I work here. I cook in my mother's kitchen. I take care of my father's garden. It's now become my garden. I run my courses in the garden. It's like there's a different level of rerouting, but it's only fixed to this house.
That locality.
This locality. Outside of this locality, it's trying to make a relationship with this place. But as we've seen over the years, especially with the Windrush generation issue, that it doesn't matter how much you can make a relationship, if the container has already decided what you are, who you are, and how you should be treated based on those ideas of who you are and what you are, it's a challenge. If we did not have this house, would I feel rooted in this country? I would say probably not. But at least if I didn't have this house, I have the stories which can help me to root myself or to reflect upon myself. So when I was at primary school, I never had the opportunity to have a storyteller of African Caribbean origin come in and tell me stories about being beautiful, that my hair could be seen as beautiful, that my skin could be seen as beautiful, that the actions of people of the African Caribbean diaspora could be seen as noble. None of that was part of my upbringing. I'm not, one could see it as a wound, or one could see it as an opportunity to understand why I do what I do, particularly when I go into schools.
Mm.
So I can go into schools now, and I know that that little black girl has never been told by the container of school that she is worthy of being seen as beautiful.
Mm.
I'll come in, tell a story where someone has their hair in cane rows, and I can say to a girl in the audience who's got her hair in cane rows, her hair was beautiful, just like yours. And you watch the reaction of the other kids are like, we never saw, it's almost like we never saw you before today.
Yeah.
We hadn't seen you. If I say her skin was dark and polished, just like yours, beautiful dark skin, those children, those white children around, look at that girl and it's as though they've seen her for the first time, because there's a reference to her that goes beyond the container's reference.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
all
and I think one of the things that I noticed, certainly through my work, is that, and it's one of the things that I'm talking about a lot in the community, particularly in our practice group. We we've covered off the land, interestingly, this last month, and that just emerged. And actually, interestingly, it's because somebody was born in Africa. Yeah, so it was really, really interesting, and suddenly kind of that came up, and it was very, very powerful for us all, in terms of exploring the land and our belonging to the land. And one of the things that I kind of noticed in my work with corporates over the years is that people almost kind of try and belong to the organization, and it's like, it's an organization, it's not the earth. Do you know what I mean? It's not a family even. It's not even a place even. It's an organization. But that longing to belong, because we've become so separate from the land. And that is a lot of what Sharon Blackie is talking about, which resonates with me, is that we've lost our connection to the land. And whatever that land is, or whatever that place is, longing to the land and the place. And so you're talking about the house as the place.
Yes.
That's so powerful as well. And certainly I've known what it's like to be and live in a place where I feel like I don't belong. And it's excruciatingly painful. Just like when you turn up to an organization and you think, oh, this is really not a place where I fit into, or I can even try to fit into. You may have recruited me in because you think that I'm bringing something that you want, and we've had these conversations, but then suddenly you then start bringing it and they go, oh, hold on, not sure we want that, not sure that's what could you just adapt? And it's like, no, and we see so much like that.
But I think the thing is that what is to be applauded is the fact that those people have some sense that they think they want it. Some people don't even want to think about having someone like you in their building. So there's the idea that they go, okay, yeah, we need to address this thing. They want to address it, but they just don't realize what that means yet. Then you turn up and they go, oh, that's what this means. We're not ready for that. That's what's happening. But there's people who have you through the door. So I think to applaud those who think they know what they want until they get it.
Well, and often it is somebody. It's often somebody who's resonating with you, who can see that this is something in the system. It's needed. But you're right. It's like when they bring you in, and then it's like, oh, if this is what it is. But then in a way, we've done the work. We've done it by stepping in, haven't we? And I think we've had those conversations. Just that stepping in, just that introduction, just that moment of connection and presence is often
it changes everything.
Yeah.
Someone said to me the other day, so I'm a Buddhist, right? And one of the women came to visit me, and we were talking about karma, and she said, karma just means behavior. And once you change behavior, everything changes.
Yeah.
And she said it's like an alcoholic will drink whiskey on a Monday morning, whiskey on a Monday evening, Tuesday morning, Tuesday evening. If they don't drink whiskey on a Wednesday morning, they've changed everything. Everything is different now because they didn't drink whiskey on a Wednesday morning. They might go back to drinking it on Wednesday evening, Thursday morning, but the fact that at that moment they did something cause and effect, they change something. So you going in, even if for a moment, and putting those questions or holding up that mirror in those situations, the responses might appear as though they're not resonating with what you're doing, but actually you've gone in and you've changed the game. Something's already in the system that is changing the system.
Yeah. No, I agree. Totally agree. Wow. So I'm thinking, January, there's so much we could carry on because there's so much we could really talk about, which is fantastic.
Yes.
But thank you so much for this conversation. And I've no doubt we'll probably come back to more conversations that we have offline, and maybe we should start putting them online.
Yes.
Because we've got quite a lot to say about this area. Yeah. But I think
sorry, can I just go back to one thing?
Yeah, of course you can.
Rooted to the land. I do worry, I'm not worried. I'm aware of the fact that we have people from other countries, other cultures living in this culture, in this country, who may not have a container like this house to feel rooted to. And like, how does that impact on the youth? You know, young people losing their connection to the land. If the land is referred, like when I was growing up, my parents talked about home all the time, and it was such a weird dissonance to have your parents talk about home when you were living here. So there was always this sense of there is another place that I'm supposed to be connected to, and that all my cultural markers and triggers, they're not here, they're somewhere else. And my parents are always telling me that through observing me, my behavior, my way of being in the world, that there's something missing in me because I don't have those cultural triggers, connections, markers, whatever it is. And there was always a slight disappointment that I didn't have these things in me naturally.
Yeah.
Because I was not rooted to that land.
Yeah.
And could be truly rooted to this land outside of this this house. And so I do wonder how, you know, speaking as someone who others have made an elder, I suppose, in their minds, how do young people from non-English communities navigate the space of not having your cultural markers with you, around you, in the people, in the, you know, in the landscape, and nothing here tells you how to be you. And then there's this sense of, why don't you naturally know how to be that?
Yeah.
Your parents.
So in a way, that's that, you know, as you're talking, I can kind of see a void. It's almost like there's a void there. And I suppose, and I wonder, in that void, is that when some of those other things get projected in to that void, you know, as in like people tell it, they're therefore then telling you who you are in that place. And rather than, it's because there's a void there. Yeah.
And luckily for me, storytelling filled that void.
Yes. Yeah.
Because there's so much to reference in the stories, there's so many things that I can go, oh, right, okay. And it's like putting little pieces of yourself, the tiny kind of micro pieces of yourself that you don't know are missing. You read the story, you tell the story, you hear the story, and you go, okay. You plug the hole. Another story, you plug that hole. Another story, you plug that hole.
Oh, wow.
And, you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, I can even feel that myself, because I think, you know, we even kind of British people, you know, who have been here to kind of generations, particularly I think the English people are really feeling like, I don't know who we are. You know, the Brexit thing threw that right up in the air, and it showed us the void in a way. And so that kind of sense of who we are, it's like we're not fully connected to the land, you know, because they feel like we've lost the stories.
Yeah.
We've lost that. We've lost that connection to our ancestral heritage. You know, it's all been about work. It's all been about industrialization. It's all been about, and actually the much deeper stuff, the cultural stuff, the kind of the sense of identity. I know Grayson Perry, it didn't fully land for me, but I know Grayson Perry tried to look at that on a series that he did recently about going through Britain and asking people about their identity linked to being British.
Right.
And obviously, I mean, and things, and also what people had attached to in the void was fascinating. It was like, really? So it's so easy to project into that void, isn't it? To actually put the stuff into the void.
Yeah, it is.
So because and then we make things up, and perhaps some of the more shadowy stuff then emerges in that space as well.
Yeah. But you know, there are some, I just want to big up a couple of really brilliant English storytellers who are out there working with land and belonging and identity and self, and they're not consciously calling it any of those things, but that's what they're doing. There's a great storyteller called Hugh Lupton, who's based in Norfolk, who's doing great work. And there's another storyteller up in Cumbria called Nick Hennessy, who's also doing great work, where their work is so embedded in where they are, where they live, and they're folklorists, the folk tellers. Nick's also a harpist and folk singer, you know, and everything that they do is rooted in this land and in this country.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful, and it doesn't have any of those kind of spiky aspects that the void, you know, the void can draw in like some weird magnet. You know, they're not on that at all. They're totally rooted, you know, in
our indigenous roots, basically. In our indigenous, because when we talk about indigenous people, it's hilarious how we talk about people from other countries when we talk about it, not realizing like, no, we're indigenous to this land as well. So where's that gone? And it's like we've been cut off from our roots.
Yeah, and I think another reason why people have been cut from their roots is because there's the attachment to the stuff that's been attracted into the void, the attachment to it in the negative sense as well. So there's an attachment to it because people are trying to make themselves big, but then there's the attachment to it from the negative side with that stuff was so bad that I can't possibly associate myself with this land. I need to look elsewhere. I need to go to another more exotic culture to demonstrate how A, flexible I am, and B, that your culture has more to offer me than my own culture. I think that's lazy. I think the Hugh Luptons of the world exist, the Nick Hennessy's of the world exist, the Sharon Blackies of the world exist. You know, they have a lot to offer and they have a lot to teach those who are looking to plug those holes.
Yeah.
You know, and what they're doing is rooted in folklore, rooted in the land, and rooted in humanity. And I think we keep going to those people, the holes will be plugged. Well, it won't happen overnight, obviously, but the holes will be plugged, you know?
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Wow, Jan, that was an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for that. And I'll put some details of Jan into the comments in the bio, so you can get information about her and her storytelling and her amazing workshops. And she's got one more thing to say.
I've just got one more thing to say. It's shameless plug. Can I have a shameless plug?
You go for a shameless plug.
So going back to this idea of being rooted and mythology and the use of myth and the focus on myth. And I've realized there's so much mythology that people talk about here in the UK. It's either Greek, Norse, or Indian. But African mythology is not really getting a look in, which is fine, you know. But for me, kind of part of plugging those holes has been a deep dive into African mythology. So there's a book which is almost like an answer to The Hero with a Thousand Faces, called The Hero with an African Face, by Clive W. Ford, and it's all African mythology. And based on my experience of reading that book and the kind of the sense of being full when I've read stories from that book, myths from that book, I'm doing my first retreat called Africa Dreaming, where I'll be looking at a particular African myth. So it'll be a 3-day retreat in Snowdonia. I can't remember how to say the new name for Snowdonia, so my apologies to anyone who knows. Snowdonia is not Snowdonia anymore. It's got its own Welsh name.
Welsh name, thank God. Yeah, good.
So I apologise that I can't remember how to say it properly. But yeah, there'll be a 3-day retreat in Wales in July. So those details can be found on my website. But I just wanted to put that because the reason behind it isn't just, oh, I want to run a retreat. The reason behind it is because I want to look at myth from an African perspective whilst living in a British landscape, and what it means to me to bring these myths out whilst being part of a diaspora culture.
Wow.
So
amazing. Well, I will put we'll put a link into the into YouTube as well, so that people can fix on and the details to contact Jan. This is not the last we will see of Jan. We're definitely going to do more. I know we are. So, but thank you so much for now.
Thank you, Tina.
Absolute delight. All right. Take care.
Bye.